Hello everyone, welcome to Creative Writers and Illustrators. This is episode number 52 and my guests for the day are Niyatee, Sharma and Nandita. Welcome.
Hi Shamala, hi Niyatee.
So both of them are pitch book writers and now they are exploring a totally new, different genre. So Niyatee, let's start with you. What's your new genre and what's the book called? Unmute yourself.
Yeah. So this is my new book. It's called Mahalakshmi Will Go to Mysore. It's an early chapter book, ideal for the age group of 7 and above. So do you want me to talk about my book?
Quick. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this book is basically, it's set in a school and the protagonist, Ira, Ira and Mahalakshmi are two children and they're from very diverse backgrounds. And initially, Ira notices that, nobody wants to play with Mahalakshmi. She's kind of feeling left out. And so, of course, while others are looking at how different she is, but Ira's curious and she wants to get to know Mahalakshmi. And when she spends time with her, she realizes that basically the class is going on a field trip, on a class trip to Mysore. And as it turns out, Mahalakshmi cannot go on the class trip because her parents think it's an unnecessary expenditure. But Ira cannot, but Ira thinks that, it's not fair that if Mahalakshmi cannot go with the rest of the children. So she really wants Mahalakshmi to join on the class trip. And the story is all about how she and her friends make it happen.
Nandita, tell us about your book.
Hi Shamala, thanks. This is my latest book, The Dog with Two Names. It's a collection of 12 short stories for children from 9 to 12, published by Speaking Tiger. And these are short stories which are set in diverse locations. So, I mean, within India. So from the cities to Matharan, Kashmir, South Goa, Landor, a variety of settings and a variety of characters. So there's a diverse cast of characters as well. A young boy selling apples in an orchard in Kashmir, a watchman guarding a gated community in Mumbai, a dog, a horse in Matharan. So diverse characters, diverse settings. But what all these stories have in common is moments of kindness, inclusion, empathy, despite all the very obvious differences between all the characters in these stories.
Nandita, picture book writing has been your comfort zone. So how did this anthology happen? Because this is not 1,000 words or even 600 words. This is, it must be hitting 25,000 or more, right?
Yeah, it's over 20,000. So I began with picture books and it remains my sort of go-to genre. When I first think of a seed of a story, I always think of it in terms of a picture book. Then I did 2 chapter books, Pedro and the Big Boom and My Trip to La La Land, but both were written as picture books. I had editors who suggested there was more story in them and flesh it out. And likewise, there was one story in this, The 3 S's of Sathi Gali, which I wrote as a picture book. And I sent to Sudeshna, the lovely Sudeshna, who said, this is an important theme. We need to talk about it. We need to talk even more about it. Can you write 11 more stories and let's make it a book? So the idea came from there, literally. And for me, it threw a challenge. It's a different format. It's a different... that story itself had to be, of course, rewritten as a short story. But I found that I thoroughly enjoyed writing, challenging myself to try out a different format and slightly older children. That's how it actually came about.
Niyatee, writing from 500 words to 5,000 words is absolutely no child's play. So how did that happen?
So, of course, I think my first love will always be picture books because that's what drew me into children's writing in the first place. This lovely marriage of pictures and words is what I was really attracted to. And so like Nandita said, even for me, every story begins with a picture book, picture book idea. Every story that I plot in my mind. But at the same time, I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of early chapter books and, various other formats. And so I wanted to write, somewhere I had this urge to write, get out of my comfort zone and write a early chapter book. And in fact, the first draft of Mahalakshmi that I wrote was also in a picture book format. But then after I wrote it, I realized that, there's a lot more that I need to tell, that I want to tell. And I don't think that, it will fit into a picture book format. And so I started to expand it. And yeah.
This is the second book this year I've seen which has focused on the RT, which kind of insists and normalizes diversity in the classroom. And RTV was introduced over a decade ago. So what's that about RT which you thought was, which should be introduced to kids of today?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons being that, children are these days, a lot of urban children, they're in their own bubble. And somewhere, they're just very comfortable playing or, and so I think the minute there's somebody who's very different or, who's not from their kind of background, children hesitate to, include them or even, but, once you get to know them, there's so much more that, is there is on a person more than just where they come from or how they look. So I think this is just to sort of inspire children to, interact with children from all walks of life. Because even as they grow up, they will, encounter people from several walks of life. And yeah, so that was the idea.
Nandita, diversity is the theme of your book.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think Niyatee was absolutely spot on in terms of the time study. And to add to that, we are living in increasingly divisive times. So we're on one hand, you're living in the silo, and then, so I do see that in schools, they are doing a lot more these days around inclusiveness, diversity. But some of this is very strong messaging that happens. And as a child who grew up reading books, and that being one of the lovely ways also putting yourself in the shoes of others, I thought stories are a lovely way, as as long as you ensure that they are fun, entertaining, adventurous, and that's fundamentally why you're turning a page. If you create this as a sort of background to it, it really addresses quite a strong need to talk about today. Quite a strong conversation starter that needs to happen. Yeah.
Nandita, your book kind of features Landor, Kashmir, Mumbai, Goa, and Mathura. So are they all? Do these stories come from lived experiences? I mean, how did you choose these places?
Yeah, absolutely. These are just the places I've been to. Some of them repeatedly. For example, Goa is literally second home, and the village is entirely based on the village where we stay, where we come from. Some of these based on my visits as a tourist, in which case I've seen it through the lens of someone who's, for example, the incident in the apple orchard in Kashmir is one that happened with me sitting there. So some of these, but all of them are really lived experiences, absolutely, because to relate a feeling of authenticity and the feel of the place, I think it's quite important to yourself have a sense of the setting, not just in a descriptive way, but what makes up the setting as a character itself, and why you use a certain setting for a certain story.
Niyatee,
So in urban stories, it's all about the large gated complex, and like she mentioned, the urban children living in silos and how they reacted to them. In other stories, it might be a tourist entering and how they might interface with, and or even try and understand a child who has a couple of years of studying in a whole year and lives in a very disruptive society. So yeah, all comes from different perspectives.
Niyatee, one of your kids is the same age as Ira and Mahalakshmi. So, did you use her as a beta reader?
Yeah.
How much was gleaned from her life and her life experiences?
In fact, the seed of the story was sown by, a conversation that my daughter had with me once when she came back from school. And in fact, yeah, so essentially, one of the other children in the class, she actually came and told my daughter not to play with a particular child because she was dark skinned and because she belonged to a poor family. So then, and of course my daughter at that point didn't know what RT is, and so then we had this long conversation, and that was pretty much the inspiration behind writing this book and the need to write this book, because I do feel that I wouldn't say children are inherently mean, but children do say mean things, and that happens because children are absorbing a lot from the environment, from maybe the adults around them, something they've heard somewhere, and they just pick it up. Children are like sponges, and then they may influence other children in the classroom. So I think that is why this conversation was important. And also simultaneously I've been like observing and having conversations with several other people, like for example my cook and her daughter and her experience and things like that. So this book stemmed from like, yeah, several inspirations.
Title Mahalakshmi will go to Mysore. That's like the reader knows what is going to happen, and
Right.
what they don't know is how it will happen, and that how is revealed only towards the end, the last chapter. And I thought that was like so gripping for a chapter book. I mean, it's not, nothing I've read so far. So at least there are one chapter before the kind of the climax is reached and there is a resolution and everything is kind of coming to normal. So what went behind plotting this book?
Yeah, so I think I would say that a big thanks to my editor, Shayani, for helping me through this process. So one thing was very clear when both of us started, discussing this book initially, that of course, it in all the good spirit and intention, Ira wanted to go out and help Mahalakshmi. But to what level will, Mahalakshmi and her family be comfortable in receiving the help? So, and then, so the idea was that why not just empower Mahalakshmi rather than, helping her? And so that's how, the plotting goes on, because the reader keeps thinking that, okay, it's just going to be, Ira helping Mahalakshmi, Ira and classmates. But then essentially, they end up empowering Mahalakshmi. Yeah, so clearly Mahalakshmi like goes to the trip with her own efforts.
Nandita, tell us something about the lead story.
The dog with two names.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is a story that's based in Goa. And I think that gorgeous cover, in fact, says it all. It really captures a very poignant moment in the story. We have a mischievous little puppy who arrives out of nowhere in this small time village in Goa. And the village has thus far, there are two clear villages communities within the village, but they've been close. They celebrate festivals together and so on and so forth. And absolutely unwittingly, this puppy stirs up a little mischief between the two communities. It starts with him being adopted by both and neither really being aware of that. He cleverly crosses over the bridge that you see and endears himself to people on both sides. And then he carries stuff from one side to another and causes friction. So you have that cover where you have both warring sides and this one moment of tension. A young girl who's really the protagonist of the story, along with a puppy, absolute shock and confusion in her eyes, in the dog's eyes. It's at the Sri Anche Fest, which is a festival of clams celebrated in this particular village. They're all fishermen, and they're refusing to come together for the first time because of what's happened, a pure misunderstanding. And how can she or maybe even the puppy make it right? So that story really has the seeds of everything I was trying to do in this book. The absolute silly reasons that sometimes artificial reasons that divide us, how these can mushroom into something so large that a wonderful community that was together suddenly divided, and seen through the eyes of this young girl and the puppy, really, who really just want things to go back to the way they were. That's the story of the dog with two names, because he was given two different names by the two communities who each sort of thought he was their own in the beginning of the story.
Niyatee, you had a question for Nandita?
Yes, yeah, I mean, I've read nearly all of your books, not all though, but yeah, I really enjoyed reading all of them. A big fan of your work. So I think in your previous books. So I wanted to talk to you about these two books, which I really, liked. The Magic in Your Fingers, I think. Magic in Your Fingers,
yes.
it's called. And Who Clicked That Pic? So they're both like
Picture books, yeah.
fictional biographies. Is that what you?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So they're very, very well done. This Who Clicked That Pic is so like beautifully and cleverly done. So what I wanted to ask is that when you wrote these books, did you think about first writing on these people and then come up with then did your research and then come up with the stories, or did you stumble upon something you read and then that interested you and then you thought of turning that into a book? So how did it go about?
Yeah. So these absolutely, I've tried. While picture book biographies are quite popular now, but in both I've tried this fictional approach, which was a little different. But I think what started it for both of them was an anecdote that I read pertaining to both women. And most interestingly, though I did a lot of research later, what I came back to, particularly in this one, was to writing that one anecdote that I first read that attracted me to them. It was more about what made them who they were, who they later were. So as a child, what sort of sowed the seed of, getting them into the arts, getting them into this passion, this field, which was very unusual in the times that they were in. For a woman to be out there with a camera, or for someone in a gharana system was to pass it on to the son. So for her to take up the sitar. So all of that. So what interested me was really what those anecdotes that I read that started them off on the paths that they later on went on to master, really. Yeah.
Right. You had a question for Niyatee?
I did. It was a double question. You've asked the first part, I think, already, which is as picture book writers, that we're now moving into other genres, and what do we feel comfortable with? But importantly, this morning, there was a publisher who was, talking about the way my career is going, and she was suggesting that internationally, it's good to be associated with a particular format. And she had a thought that, middle school librarian will always go for a book series by certain authors and so on. So for a while to, get to the depths of the format, which is really not what I've been doing, going across. What are your thoughts on this? Experiment and learn with trying out different formats, or go right in the depths of picture books, perhaps our first love, as you said.
Correct. I think I was kind of, itching to try out a new format. It was something I really wanted to experiment and try out. But yeah, I think let's see. The book is just out. So, who knows if I continue in this format, or, I just continue with picture books. But yeah, like we discussed, picture books will always be my first love.
True. Absolutely.
Sometimes we never know the speed of an idea. We don't know where it will end up. I think as long as you enjoy doing what you are doing, it is fine. But yes, picture books is a comfort zone, but then you don't know how far you can go unless you travel that path, right?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
I think as readers, like you said, like librarians probably look out for a certain author in a certain format. But I think as readers, I don't think they really look at who's writing what, right? They just look at the story. And if it interests them, then yes.
Yeah. A good story will always find.
Yeah.
And in different genres, like if somebody has a favorite author writing in 3 different genres, then they will
take out.
that will be like a lovely treat, right?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much. I can see that these two books are going to have a fab year ahead, and I can't really wait to see where they will go. All the best, and I'm waiting.
Thank you so much for doing that, Sharma. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamla. Thank you so much for reading these, and yeah, thank you for your questions. It really helps us to also kind of do some soul
Connection.
searching and yeah, yes.
You for me.
Thank you.